Um, I am sitting here in the very early morning in Toronto, and I'm savoring this extraordinarily beautiful book, which has such an absolute wealth of projects and intelligence and making and sheer contributions to knowledge that CITA has given over the past decade and more. I'm also savoring the deeper book, which accompanies it, which precedes it, which speaks about the center itself in CETA works, and it has been Riverside Architecture Press's tremendous pleasure to be able to share this with you and to support it and to contribute in very small ways, seeing that CETA is a fundamental institution in the world, contributing fundamental kinds of new knowledge to architecture. I want to say a few more words about that by offering some meditations on models, on new models, on the complex modeling that is illustrated in this book. And I hope it's okay if I spend just a few minutes in sharing a couple of images and perhaps a couple of words as well to reflect on the kind of deep knowledge creation that I see CETA practicing within this work. I'm just going to fumble for a second by sharing my screen, and so I hope it's okay if I take a second on that. Forgive me if it's just a bit messy. Um, so now I believe I'm sharing my screen, and I hope that you can see now a slide called New Models. May I just get just your confirmation that that's showing now? It just Thank you so much. So just for a couple of minutes, I want to meditate on the new model. Pardon me? Thank you very much. Okay, you bet. Thank you for your help and thanks for your. Okay, so I just need to swap those two. Okay, and okay, so just to share some thoughts on the models that are the subject of this book and perhaps some of the underlying qualities. We come from a world, perhaps the last 100 years, in which knowledge has been surging about the vast, unthinkably vast universe that surrounds us and that's inside us, the molecular structures that are part of our bodies and of nature, the interconnected systems that are all around us. And I see CETA absolutely embracing the kind of diversity and the depth of all of materiality in taking on this extraordinary responsibility of designing the built environment, using the new tools of computational design, thinking about modeling, thinking about new systems like textiles and information and dynamics, and seeking to make wholes, living, fertile wholes. It makes me think about the way we have been approaching what makes the whole, the conception of what makes the whole, and how we model it. Perhaps I'm not alone in having been brought up by very, very well meaning parents who had some concerns about the power that was involved in nations and in religions, the kind of turbulence of the 20th century that resulted in such extraordinary suffering in the two world wars, the extraordinary power of the atom bomb, for example, the capacity to do harm, perhaps the even more deep, deep and unsettling sense that nature itself has been displaced today and is now uncertain. One body of thinking about how to model the whole and what brings us together and what the underlying structures of the world are would be that of existentialism, the philosophy that precedes our generation, the philosophy that says that we really are alone and that space really is empty and that there are remarkable small islands twirling and swirling and perhaps making sanctuaries with atmospheres and closing them, and within them living structures are arising. Perhaps there are others beyond ours, but interconnecting all of those things, that world, that galaxy, that person, that person, that thought, that action, the whole field of what happens is space, the fundamental medium for us as architects. And that space in the generation that preceded us, in the 100 years that preceded us, the modernism that has preceded us, that has brought us here, had one fundamental defining quality. It was empty. That empty wasn't just a condition of fact, it was somehow a mission. It was important to render space empty. It was important to carve away and strip away prevailing religions and nations and myths and sentiments, and instead look at things unvarnished, objectively, without any kind of belief or sentiment or false comfort about rituals clogging and interfering with things. And so the mission to make things empty, to see space as a void, was a kind of pride-filled mission, a remarkable, beautiful kind of thing that certainly allows us to try to see things as objective and real and factual. And yet, when I look at some evidence of what space is today, I see this kind of image instead. Perhaps you're familiar with this image. The large Bolshoi simulation is the collection of all possible, all known radio transmissions from the past and present across the entire universe, modeled and simulated and gathered simply in the topologies and relationships of all of that information. Bolshoi means grand, symphonic, infinitely large. And so this is a kind of an image of the entire universe, just like the preceding image of all of those galaxies and planets that I was showing from the Hubble Space Telescope. But I'm very, very struck by what a remarkably different kind of model the large Bolshoi simulation is than the kind of model of little points separated by vast, unthinkable empty space in the preceding slide. What can we see in this? We can see that it's deeply filamentary, that there are traces, that there are clusters, that it is cellular, that somehow it has a remarkable kind of organic coherence, whether self-assembling or the residue of previous intelligences, whether sentient or mineral. The sense of sheer empathy that the human psyche can see in such a field, I think, is absolutely remarkable. And it suggests that a rather different set of words for interconnected models and interconnected topologies within space are needed. Perhaps empty space and objectivity belong in a preceding generation rather than our own. And perhaps some very new words, or perhaps some very old words, belong instead to speak about what the space of our built environment is, and therefore what the underlying qualities that CITA and other colleagues are working on. I'll come back to this slide just at the end, but I want to just gather then a few things that I hope that introduces the need for some new paradigms. And that's what I think the CITA project in complex modeling is contributing to fundamentally. One set of qualities goes into the idea of knowledge creation needing to follow a very disciplined line from ideas to action. When I say that ideas precede action, I'm speaking about a long, long tradition, perhaps inherited from Plato, perhaps developed during the Renaissance, that first we need a concept, and then we develop it, and then we move into creating some prototypes, and then we test them, and then we finally have them ready for the responsibility of going into the world, and then we implement them, and then there is labor and concrete kind of mass production perhaps following, and then it becomes popular. One line, a tremendously disciplined line. And that narrative, that responsibility that says you don't act before you think, is one that is also a myth, in the sense that one of the things that I love about CITA is that it has offered a renewal to such an idea, rather than the Platonic idea that an idea must precede an action, and that an action will almost always somehow just be a degradation, a compromise, a slightly disappointing fulfillment of an idea. The idea is always going to be more perfect. It's always going to be more transcendental. The sense, I believe, in CITA that action can cycle into ideas, can cycle into new action, can cycle into an idea in a continual cycling, in which it would be absurd to say, where did you get that from? Because it comes from the cycling of one to the other, and one to the other again, and one to the other again. I think is a very important model. The idea that we are not living in a single fixed linear world where ideas are better than action, and the aristocracy is better than the laboring class, but rather our blue collar is just as important as our white collar, and our bodies are just as important as our minds, and the two things, body and mind, and earth and spirit, are utterly interwoven. I think this is one of the contributions that CITA practices. This makes me think about fundamental paradigms for architecture. And again, I think that CITA is making some fundamental contributions to knowledge creation by working both with some old paradigms and some very new ones. An old set of paradigms might be those offered by Vitruvius, the Roman writer who was writing in 100 AD in the Common Era, when he said firmitas utilitas venustus, that is to say, solid foundations, beautiful firmity, the seeking of the solidity of the world, of permanence, of durability, all of that cluster of extraordinary terms that goes into firmitas. Utilitas, that is the use of something, how it functions, the beautifully tuned program of making sure that it functions, that it acts like a tool, and that it has impacts in the world that are measured. And venustus too, beauty, the whole world of aesthetics, of the posture and proportion of things, and the ways things sing, and the way things have euphony. Those three terms of a preceding generation depend on such solidity and such polarized relations between empty space or well-resolved boundaries that it seems time to look at a new set of paradigms. And it seems very natural to look at the paradigms for living systems, such as the minimum ingredients for what constitutes a living system. We could say that that constitutes a compartment, the cellular structure that allows something to be a whole, metabolism, the qualities of energy and exchange that allow that being, that living thing, to exchange and contribute and work with the world, and fundamentally information, the templating and the behavioral sets and the memory and the projection that allow this thing to continually refresh itself and exchange with the world and remember itself and reproduce itself. Perhaps those three terms might be a tremendously helpful complement to the Vitruvian triad of firmitas, utilitas, venustus. Again, CITA, with information embedded within its definition, I think offers a tremendously vivid new set of paradigms for knowledge creation within architecture. Perhaps this raises fundamental questions about the topology of the model itself. And when I look through this beautiful volume of complex modeling, yes, I see meditations on preceding definitions of architecture that are based on the boundary, on what encloses us, on what constitutes the envelope that emplaces us. Yes, that traditional architecture is certainly fulfilled. But again and again in this book, I see examples of an efflorescence of new terms that speak about the infolding and the exchanging and the many and the deeply interwoven connections between things, suggesting that perhaps a fundament of a new architecture would be the space of the manifold rather than the single boundary. The kind of delicious sense of being interconnected and the 1,000 words that we need to develop for this kind of space. This then, I think, invites me to return to what I was speaking about earlier, about empty space, the kind of existential void that was the proud mission of a preceding generation in existentialism. Empty space was a kind of morality, encouraging us to believe that we could live happily with the reality of empty space. But perhaps there are some new words and new terms that we can use in looking at how we can contribute complex modeling to the built environment. The extraordinary transformative progress that's happened at the CERN center underneath Geneva, in the Large Hadron Collider, the extraordinary accelerator, the 27-kilometer long collider that's underground, and all of the new physics that has been developed in subatomic space, has revealed the Higgs field, finally, the completion of the general theory of relativity, in the sense that we can understand that there is the act of mass arising. The Higgs particle is the act of mass arising. And that means that we can see that things are coupled, that particles are forever waves, that space itself is full of potential, literally, the field of quantum potential. And this suggests that space perhaps can start to use an older word. In fact, it's the word that Einstein himself used when he was composing the general theory of relativity, a word that's been used since before the Renaissance, before the boundaries and the isolation and the perhaps misplaced clarity of trying to isolate and put things behind walls occurred during the Renaissance. The word ether, I would suggest, is a fundamental word for space. And perhaps it becomes a very, very contemporary world as well, in which we share and we see, and the work that we seek can be fundamentally sensitive and caring and rooted in empathy. So I hope that those comments might offer a few of the paradigms that I believe that the Center for Information Technology is practicing. I want to say just one more thing, which is that we can speak about research, perhaps the institutional mandate of CITA, and the work that's embedded within complex modeling. We can also speak about creation, the joyful, beautiful, beautiful installations and all of the instruction sets and the algorithmic processes and the incredible elegance and the joy with which they are presented here and the way they're practiced. But if we speak about research and creation as somehow two different things in classical terms, in institutional modeling, then I think it really is time to speak about research creation as one integrated kind of knowledge creation. Some of our colleagues are already using that word. And I think that CITA exemplifies this new kind of research creation, of information creation, of knowledge creation. Because research creation brings the deeply, deeply embodied, motivated world of the artist right into the realm of science and computation and engineering. So that if you feel personally and if you care about what you do, then that is a very, very welcome part of the kind of objective analysis and the engineering and the implementation of your work. And it gives first order knowledge creation. It gives a sense of extraordinary involvement. Research creation is, I think, a very important contribution that CITA is practicing. It's no exaggeration to call it one of the most important institutes in the world in architecture today, in this contribution. So I'll just stop sharing again, just so that I can see you directly. And I want to say that I hope that these thoughts of some of the underlying paradigms, some of these speculations might be a contribution. It's my absolute pleasure to be able to share this moment with you. Congratulations.